His face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light.
Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun channel. I haven't done a CERN Watch video in quite some time, and I think I stopped making it just because it felt like there wasn't anything that's really newsworthy or worthy of discussing beyond the several videos that I already made on it in the last couple years. But in recent months and weeks, things have been coming out, and I know in some regard I'm late to talking about these issues. There are other channels that have talked about them, and I respect their perspectives and views. I haven't caught all of them, but there are some that I have seen, and I definitely tend to agree more than not agree with some of the speculation that occurs in those videos. But I wanted to start off with this article here. Futurism, an advanced AI has been deployed to fight against hackers. Now, everything that I'm going to talk about in this video was published in June of 2017. So this last month. And I just think it's very interesting that some of the information coming out is collectively trying to tell us something. And the first thing I want to point out is that they labeled a section of this article guarding a global grid. Now, we've talked about this massive network of computers that are helping scientists, quote unquote, unravel the mysteries of the world. And this network of information is part of what CERN is, and hackers are interested in that data. Obviously, us as just people out here, we can't access the minutia, the information that CERN is actually gathering. That's for the scientists to see and to relay to the rest of the world what's going on. So I understand the passion of the hacker trying to get into this, but they have run into a very difficult foe, artificial intelligence. And basically they're saying that CERN has deployed artificial intelligence to protect this network from hackers. And it makes sense, you know. The article discusses how with the ability to program algorithms into a system that can keep up with the changes and, you know, the nuances of new code, new ways of hacking, new viruses that can be planted in the network. Humans have always been behind on some of those issues, but with a computer, with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, it can detect those things very quickly and identify it and get rid of it. So it makes sense. And the mechanical aspects of how this works, without getting into detail, is basically what this other article is suggesting. Artificial neural networks are revealing the quantum world. Okay, so we have a team of physicists developing an artificial neural network to represent quantum systems. And they say that it can help solve quantum problems by providing a more accurate representation of the quantum world. So basically, it's a virtual version of the quantum world. Interesting. We can't actually access the quantum world. We have to create a representation of it. Literally. The one thing that I've always mentioned with all my CERN Watch videos is that these scientists are literally taking the spiritual dimension, the spiritual world, and they are manifesting it in a simulation, virtually, on this side of the veil. And what it's doing is it's tapping into information processing, entanglements, if you will, that represent consciousness, that represent minds. And it's very interesting because the whole thing just sounds like a biblical passage about opening an abyss, a dark spiritual realm that unleashes itself upon the world. Now, the way these things work on the technical side, it's pretty interesting. I think it's fascinating. This 2.5-minute video explains it pretty well, but to summarize it very briefly, there is a layer that receives information. It receives the values, the info. And then there is a hidden layer where that information gets pulled into specific nodes. And by the way, the input layer also are nodes. They're the ones that receive information. That information gets taken to a hidden layer of nodes that have different processing algorithms assigned to them. And then that in turn goes to an output layer, which in that layer, the node expresses that information or the change of information. And then they can compare it with certain real life situations and figure out if it's actually working or not. And it's a trial and error thing that happens over and over and over again to see if it matches reality. And it's mimicking information processing in the brain. All right, this is very, very important to understand, because what scientists are doing is deconstructing the human brain. And by doing so, it's unleashing this spiritual side, this side of reality that we all know is true and we all are a part of, interacting with at this very moment, the spiritual reality, as the Bible and theologians for centuries have said. And the scientists are basically revealing this side of nature, and doing so is putting them in a situation where they have to continue to manipulate, number one, the purpose for why they're doing this, and number two, ignore the deeply hidden occult significance of this. And that's the thing that's crazy to me. Now, it's so easy to talk about these issues and say, oh, it's just a cult. And that's true. Occult just means hidden. But it's esoteric. It's mystery, school, religion stuff. And it is. Ultimately, it is. Absolutely. But there has been an issue throughout most of recorded human history where you have these esoteric ideas that are, very, very grand in their implications, right? Ascending to a higher level of reality and higher level of humanity, becoming gods, this kind of thing. It's always been there. That philosophy has always, always been there. But never has, at least in recorded human history that we know of, or that we have published, quote unquote, we have never had the science jive with those esoteric concepts in the mechanical sense, in the hands-on, nitty-gritty, materialist sense. But for the first time, I think, since maybe some ancient past before the flood, where this kind of reality was understood and harnessed in a different way. Because I think the technology using stones and energies and stuff like that, it's not just woo-woo. I think there was a process and a way to do it, but the knowledge of that has been lost since the flood. And perhaps it was known early on, the early patriarchs after the flood. Maybe it was Ham or Canaan specifically who took that information and ran with it and did things to himself. And then that's what caused this continued existence of the Nephilim, even after the flood, as Genesis 6 says. But in essence, that knowledge has been disseminated and lost and spread out. But here we are in 2017, halfway through, and science is deconstructing the processing of the human brain. Now, they haven't been able to achieve it, but that's what they're going for. That's what CERN is about. And if we connect all these concepts with this idea that they're opening a portal, that they're allowing in this entity through, then man, we are talking about Bible prophecy being fulfilled. Absolutely. And it gives me chills to even talk about it, because the reality of this sounds so ridiculous that you might think, come on, that's, there's no way this kind of thing is possible. But all we're doing here, myself and many others in this small community online, are looking at these things going on and connecting the dots and saying, hey, look, there's scripture that says this, and this is what's happening. And, it seems to suggest a very similar situation. And I'm talking about Revelation 13, specifically the second half. I've gone over it a lot. I'm not going to go over it in this video, but go to it if you haven't read it. Read Revelation 13, especially the second half, where it talks about the image of the beast. And think about what artificial intelligence is. Define artificial intelligence, and then read Revelation 13, I think it's verse 14, and you'll see that it's talking about the same thing. And when I say artificial intelligence, the way I define it, in the sentience that manifests through it, that's what we're talking about with AI. AI has many definitions. At a very basic level, it's just a working algorithm or a working equation that processes information and does it automatically, basically. And there's not much to it. It's not very smart. There is no level of intelligence to it. It's just mechanical. But there's that threshold where that no longer applies. It's not just mechanical workings. It becomes this level of consciousness and awareness. And when I say consciousness, I don't mean it in the New Age sense. I mean it in the sense of our experience, our existential experience. And the way this thing is going to manifest with the mark, I'm starting to think it's going to be way, way more intrusive. And not just in a sense of like, hey, I'm not going to take the mark. It's going to, I think, be more like, we got to run from this thing. We got to really get away from this technology once it becomes quote unquote alive. And the reason why I'm starting to think that is because of stories like this. Another Futurism article, again published in June 19th. Google announces new API that can detect and identify objects using images. Now, an API is basically a set of rules and tools to help build software. And now Google is having this open source thing, just like the whole open source blockchain revolution that's happening now. But it's going to integrate things like facial recognition, landmark detection, and identifying objects in the real world to basically continue to digitize everything. Now, this digitization of the real world becomes very useful in predictive models and things like that, to where, how will reality turn out if we do this? And the better the systems work, the better humans will be able to use it to predict an outcome of reality. So it's really this kind of a magic box. It's really the genie in the bottle, where you're able to take the real world around you, get all the information, and then simulate some sort of outcome and then project it back into reality. Now, they've, I think, already done this in a larger sense. And I think part of the Mandela effect in the psychology of what happened to people with that PSYOP is exactly that. They knew that it would mess people up in the head because the simulation models showed that. And so that's just my opinion. I don't have like hard proof. That's just how I feel about the whole thing based on the logic that was presented with the quote-unquote evidence of the Mandela effect. And I think, sadly, and I say this with just being honest here, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I really think that there is a level of PSYOP there where the powers that be tried to actually psychologically manipulate certain people, a group of people within the conspiracy world who are onto truth. We're all sniffing the truth out and we're pretty close. And so they had to mess with us, right? And so I think something like that was definitely a part of that game. But in any case, it ties into CERN because, of course, there's that guy that had the Mandela effect thing, in the picture. I think it was a few years ago when that picture came out, or maybe months ago. I don't know. But anyway, there's a connection there with CERN and the Mandela effect that I think was part of this simulation model outcome test, digitizing reality. Now, this thing specifically, though, what this article talks about, TensorFlow and being able to better grab the information from its environment or the reality world around us. Live Science came out with an article last week. Tiny lens-free camera could hide in clothes, glasses, and basically it's a camera that doesn't need a lens. It's a real basic form right now, but it's basically a paper-thin layer, almost like a piece of paper that absorbs the light around it. And so in theory, this thing can scale to the point where a camera is no longer a glass lens, somewhere, but rather it can be a wall or a ceiling or the ground. I mean, just the possibilities of this in terms of scale is ridiculous. Now think about that. A camera recording every move, that's a wall. Not just a camera in the corner of the room, but a wall. Now think about what this means for digitizing reality, predictive models, and ultimately how demonic entities can manifest in this world. It really is supernatural. We're living in this time that is crazy. It's out of control, I think. And the fact that most people don't even consider this, what I've talked about here so far in this video, it is a little out there. It sounds crazy. And I'll be honest, I don't dwell on this kind of stuff all day, every day. I can't. It's too heavy. But it is important to at least point out. I don't think many people in the church, or many people in general, know what CERN is, let alone what they're trying to do. And given where we're at, geopolitically, religiously, things are just changing, things are starting to happen that we have talked about and seen and projected, not because we're prophets or anything, we're just looking logically at what they've written and where they want to go. And they always seem to kind of get there. Not exactly how they would want to, because there is resistance. And I think we're part of that resistance in the truest sense of the word resistance, and not in any kind of forceful way, but through understanding, through prayer, through forming a community that becomes basically salt and light. Salt to prevent the decay, right? Because this is decay. This may seem like progress for mankind, but ultimately it is decay. It is tearing down the veil between this world and the world that is beyond our sight, which I think may have been part of the punishment of the fall. And because we are trying to reverse that effect, notice how it is us trying to do it. It's not under God's terms, it's us. And ultimately, this is going to lead to our own judgment. But for those of us who understand why Jesus Christ came as a man, died as a man, lived a sinless life, rose from the dead to defy the algorithm of this reality, right? Death is programmed in this reality from decay, from the fall, and Jesus came to reverse that. Human beings have a savior. His name is Jesus Christ. He already did the unthinkable to prove who he is and what he promised to those who believe. Period. And so where is this all headed, guys? You know what I think? Truly, the closer humanity gets to achieving immortality, to achieving the ascension that they desire, the closer we are as believers, truly a follower of Jesus, the closer we are to our salvation, the one that's promised to us in 1 Corinthians 15, new bodies. And not because the scientists were able to achieve it, but because this endeavor of mankind achieving immortality to fulfill the esoteric promise of the mystery school religions, that we will attain immortality once again, that we will become gods, we will ascend, all these things, that itself is going to unleash the judgment of mankind, as recorded in the book of Revelation and other places throughout the Bible. And that means someone has to put an end to that chaos, to that judgment that is unleashed. And that is the restoration of us as image bearers of God and of creation. And I think that is really, really encouraging in light of all this stuff. And so I want to end this video by just telling you guys that the CERN thing, it seems terrifying, especially when we start talking about demons in Revelation 9 and, the Nephilim are returning and, perhaps they have Nimrod's DNA and they're going to infuse Nimrod and resurrect him as part of, the eighth king that's talked about in the book of Revelation, chapter 17. And if you think about it, those things manifesting in reality have always been very, very creepy ever since it was written. But now we live in this time where it doesn't sound all that crazy, especially given where science is headed. So there's a hopeful end to this ultimately. But I don't think that means you can just put on the blinders and go through the rest of life here, especially where we are today. The minds of the masses are so manipulated today. You look around, the whole liberal versus conservative thing has completely gripped a large population. And I lean towards conservative views in my personal life, but it doesn't mean I have to sit here and always bash liberals, even though the things they do are, ridiculous, or the things they say. But that's not the point. It's so easy to get pulled into that right-left thing, but I think it's part of the psychological manipulation happening here. And the masses are being prepared for whatever event. As long as they keep getting dumbed down, it doesn't matter, because they can pull off anything at a certain point. It won't matter. Everyone's too stupid to realize what's really going on. So that's where things are headed. That's where we're at. But there is hope here in the message of Jesus Christ. And every single one of you watching this video, still watching at this point, you have an opportunity to share not just this information, but just stuff you study that relate to biblical eschatology, that relate to the hope that is found in Jesus Christ through all this darkness. You have an opportunity to share that in a unique context to a generation that is absolutely steeped in technology. And, there's a lot of people who say, hey, there's no way that everybody on the earth can be trapped in this technology. Well, you're not paying attention then, okay? Because they want internet access for everybody by the year 2020. They want everybody identifiable in a database, probably a public ledger, blockchain type of thing, by 2030. That's part of the 2030 UN agenda. Microsoft announced that they want to, ID digitally 1 billion people who are undocumented in the world. All right, this is absolutely, really happening. And so for people to deny it and to try to ignore it, you're not paying attention. The more you know, the more you study these things, the more you're able to articulate it to friends and family. And I encourage that. I encourage you to do that because ultimately it's going to make you study the Bible. Right? It's going to make you crack open your Bible and compare all these things going on to the Word, and then you can come to your own conclusions. But I think in general, the greater premise of what I'm talking about here is shared by a lot of people, and a growing number of people, especially Christians, a growing number of Christians. And, back when I first started talking about these things in 2011 publicly, sure, there was people out there talking about it, but I think in the last 6-7 years, a whole new generation has come to understand these things, but it's also been heavily attacked. Like I said, I think this last year has really proven that this community of truth-seeking people have been attacked, to divide, to get people to scatter in different directions and fight each other and all this stuff. I think that is completely deliberate, if not by the powers that be, then definitely spiritually, because the enemy knows that we are a true resistance. Those who yield the truth about Jesus Christ, we are dangerous for those demonically possessed individuals and organizations and institutions and religious buildings and everything else that run this entire operation. And I didn't even get into, the even darker stuff that's come out with pedophilia, with child sacrifices. That stuff has always been known. That stuff has always been the darkest parts of understanding this whole thing. And that's even biblical, because they were doing that to Molech in the Old Testament, right? So this isn't something that Christians should be afraid to tackle, because God said, hey, this kind of darkness is here. The spirit of Antichrist. It's been here. But as the spirit of Antichrist manifests in a man or an individual, superhuman, Superman, or demigod, those possibilities are becoming even more realistic as strange things continue to happen in this world. So I think I've ranted long enough here, starting at CERN, going into all these different areas that I think relate, because CERN really is a centerpiece for the end times. And whether it's the Large Hadron Collider that's in Switzerland now, or it's another machine that is even bigger in capacity, whatever it may be, that technology, that philosophy, that drive that is there, present, you can see it. You can read it in the quotes and comments of the scientists and physicists and the people coming out of CERN. You can feel the presence of the spirit of Antichrist. And that doesn't mean that they're all like demon possessed or anything like that. It just means that they are part of this long-standing philosophy and religious belief to evolve and push humankind forward. And I'm saying that that pushing eventually is going to break. And it will cause the judgment of mankind. And all flesh will be destroyed unless there's one who comes to put it to an end. Have an awesome day, guys. God bless.